Hello everyone and welcome back to another lecture series and a video on statement and arguments. हम लोग बात कर रहे थे लॉजिकल रीजनिंग की. We are preparing every viewers whomsoever are interested for competitive examinations, where which logical reasoning is going to be one part of their syllabus of that particular competitive examination. And in that particular sense only, we have uh, come up with this particular lecture series where we are discussing about statement and arguments, a very important portion of discussion whenever we are going to prepare for competitive examinations. Logical reasoning specifically talking, and there are different parts of logical reasoning also that has been asked in various competitive examinations, whether be it bank PO, whether be it SSC, whether be it your CLAT examinations, any examination where which analytical reasoning is being tested, you will find questions which is related to logical reasoning, and statements and arguments also you will find questions on the same. In our previous lecture, we have discussed about what exactly statements and arguments, and क्या मतलब होता है particularly statement का, क्या मतलब होता है particularly argument का, कैसे हम लोग infer करते हैं that this particular statement is logically following the argument or not, whether the answer that is obviously in front of you guys it will be, and at that point of time you will have to figure out. आप लोगों को पता लगाना होता है कि क्या ये जो स्टेटमेंट लिखा हुआ है और ये जो आर्ग्यूमेंट दिया हुआ है ये एक दूसरे से रेजोनेट कर रहे हैं, एक दूसरे को कॉम्प्लीमेंट कर रहे हैं या नहीं. इस लेक्चर सीरीज में भी, इन दिस पर्टिकुलर लेक्चर सीरीज आल्सो, वी आर फोकसिंग ओवर द इंपॉर्टेंट एरियाज ऑफ CLAT examinations and all the competitive examinations, and we are specifically focusing over the logical reasoning areas. इस statement of argument में हम लोग बात करेंगे जो important questions हैं, topics, as well as the tips that is required whenever we are going to solve questions which is related to statements and arguments. कि हमारे को क्या tips use करनी चाहिए, क्या tricks होती हैं statement और arguments के correct answer पे पहुंचने के लिए. So without wasting any of the time, my dear students, let's try to understand that what are the important tips that one has to take into consideration whenever they are solving questions which is related to statements and arguments, an important portion of logical reasoning. The images used in our slide deck are for educational purposes only. We respect the intellectual property rights of the original creator and the owners of these images. If you are the owner of any of the images used in this deck and have any concerns or issues, please contact us at sathee.at.iitk.ac.in and we shall remove the images. So my dear students, as you have already gone through our previous video where we have discussed about the introduction portion of statements and arguments, we have talked about that what exactly statement means and what exactly argument means. In this particular video, we are going to talk about the tips for solving statements and arguments questions. But before that, before we start, इससे पहले कि हम लोग start करें कि क्या statement होता है, क्या arguments होते हैं, let's try to have a quick revision of what all we have studied in our previous lecture. So in our previous lecture, we have studied about the introduction portion of the statements of arguments, जहाँ पे हम लोगों ने समझा कि what exactly statement means and what exactly argument means. In the statement and argument logical reasoning section, an argument is a statement or series of statement in which a certain point of view is put up, expressing different opinions for or against something. So for or against something of what? Of the statement in itself. तो जो स्टेटमेंट दिया गया है उस स्टेटमेंट के साथ साथ एक आर्ग्यूमेंट भी दिया जाता है, और वो आर्ग्यूमेंट या तो फिर उस सर्टेन व्यू पॉइंट को जो स्टेटमेंट में दिया गया है उसको या तो फिर वो उसके साथ होगा इन फेवर ऑफ दैट पर्टिकुलर स्टेटमेंट और अगेंस्ट ऑफ दैट स्टेटमेंट, एंड वी विल हैव टू फिगर आउट दैट whether that argument which is favoring that statement or which is against the statement, how much logically it is following the statement or not. So argument is a very important part of analytical reasoning, and all possible types of questions from analytical reasoning like inferences, assumption, course of action, syllogism, ये सब चीज हम लोगों ने पढ़ रही हैं, are in some way related to the argumentation. That is the reason why arguments are called the backbone of analytical reasoning. ये चीज हम लोगों ने पहले पढ़ चुके हैं, तो अब हम लोग चलते हैं and let's try to understand that what exactly is statement and argument in reasoning. So in simple language, argument is a point of view on a particular matter supported by certain evidence. So that certain evidence, when we are talking about our past experiences, the evidence, facts that has been provided. So based on those assumptions, based on those reasonings, we are figuring out whether the statement and the arguments are complementing each other. The candidate, now it is for the competitive examination aspirants, all the viewers who are watching this video, this is for you. The candidate is required to check the forcefulness of a given argument, such as if they are weak or strong. In technical terms, an argument may be said to be in sequence of two or more phrases, clause, sentences that include a claim or conclusion. तो जो क्लेम और कंक्लूजन दिया गया है, हम उस आर्ग्यूमेंट के बेसिस पे हम लोग ये फिगर आउट करेंगे कि वो जो आर्ग्यूमेंट है और जो स्टेटमेंट लिखा गया है वो कितना एक दूसरे को कॉन्ट्रडिक्ट कर रहे हैं या एक दूसरे को कॉम्प्लीमेंट कर रहे हैं. इफ द स्टेटमेंट्स आर कॉन्ट्रडिक्टिंग, then we will reject that answer. We will not take that answer into consideration. And when we are talking about any statement and the argument which are complementing each other, we will take that as a strong argument and we will accept that as a correct answer. Such a conclusion is arrived with the help of one or more than one statement, which can be called a premise or a proposition. So these are the technical words, my dear students. You need to remember this one, prepositions, premise, because based on this prepositions only the questions will be put up. We are just going to discuss how the questions will be there in front of you after this revision has been completed and then the tips has been discussed. But for your better understanding and guidance, it is very much important for you to understand the concepts also. Because yes, you will be able to solve the question even without understanding the concept. But the edge a student will get after they have understood the concept is that they know exactly why this answer has to be in such particular manner. Why the answer has to be in resonance with the statement and the argument that has been provided. So apart from this, an argument has hidden premises also, and such premises are called assumptions. So assumption statements and assumption is an entirely different topic that we will be covering in our upcoming lectures. But here we will only be dealing with statements and arguments, and not apart from that anything else apart from statements and arguments. Different type of questions are covered in the statement and argument reasoning, such as sequential order or arrangement, position test, time sequence test, and so on. Several type of problems based on logical reasoning sections are also asked in various competitive examinations. So logical reasoning के बहुत सारे parts हैं. You have syllogism, you have course of actions, you have statements and assumptions, you have a sequence series, you have time-based questions, and in the same manner, you have statements and arguments. All these questions that are there in your competitive examination is focusing over a one very important particular topic, and that is your analytical skills. How you are developing your analytical skills, how you are much complied with those analytical skills are something that needs to be tested in all these competitive examinations. And that is why this video is going to be very much assisting and helpful for you so that you can get a clear idea that how you need to solve these questions so that you can get good marks, and not only the good marks, but also you have developed that analytical reasoning in your brains so that all those important areas can be covered. So moving forward, the types of arguments and statements are already been discussed in our past videos, where which we have talked about the weak arguments, where we have talked about that all those arguments which are under the statement and argument. Okay, and they form a weak argument are to be neglected. I am repeating it again, are to be neglected and not accepted. Why? Because these arguments are not going to be logically, reasonably following the statement that has been provided. So if any of the statement that has been mentioned, for example, it has been mentioned that mobile phone use of mobile phone is going to be harmful for the upcoming generations. And then there are arguments that has been given in favor or against it. The first argument says that use of mobile phone is actually beneficial for the student because it helps them in solving their solving their questions or solving their exercises. This is the first argument. And the second argument says that mobile phone also helps them in socializing. So these two statements are not actually resonating or complementing the statement that has been provided. So that is why we need to figure out those statements which are strong in nature, which are actually complementing the premise or the proposition that has been given. And that is why it is important to figure out any ambiguous argument, superfluous argument, or question back argument in the question that has been given, because these type of arguments has to be neglected. I repeat, this argument has to be neglected and not taken into consideration. Rather, what we have to take into consideration are the strong arguments. Strong arguments are those arguments in this type of statements and argument reasoning. Candidate will be given arguments which are strong in nature. Okay, strong arguments are of various types and they are mentioned below. Established facts. So if the argument is based on the established fact, then that argument has to be taken into consideration. Or experiences predict that the result will follow. And on the basis of the experiences, if any argument has been given, that argument has to be considered as a strong argument. And in the same manner, prevailing notion of truth. If this, any of the argument which is given for the proposition of the premises and following that an argument which has prevailing notion of truth, that argument has to be taken into consideration, not the weak argument, but the strong argument, because these arguments are more complementing towards the premise and the proposition that has been given. And those arguments will be the correct answer for the questions that will be there in regards to the statements and arguments. We will be focusing over the question. We have inculcated exercises as well as practice questions in this particular lecture series, so that the students are more acquainted with the type of questions that they will be facing in the competitive examinations. Not only that, we have also prepared this video in such a manner that the students, after understanding the concept and understanding the tips, when we will try to solve the questions and we'll exercise the different type of questions which is related to statements and arguments, then these concepts will be utilized, and these tips that we are going to discuss are going to be utilized, and or based on that only we are going to solve the question, my dear students. So I suppose you have understood that what exactly is strong argument and what exactly is the weak argument. Whenever we are going to solve questions which is related to statements or arguments, please make sure that you keep in mind that we have to follow the strong argument and we have to neglect the weak argument of the premise or the proposition that has been provided. So my dear student, this was what we have studied in our previous video. Now we are going to study about the tips for solving statement and argument questions. And this is going to be a very important portion for the point of discussion when we are talking about logical reasoning and the questions which is related to statements and arguments, because this is going to give you a cut-edge approach which will be beneficial for you whenever you are approaching any questions related to statements and arguments. So the very first tip that has been mentioned under the topic of tips for solving statement and argument is as follows. Tips for solving statement and argument questions. The first is identify biases. So whenever there is a statement that has been given, it is always that there are two perspectives behind that particular statement. One which is going to be favoring that particular statement, and one which is going to neglect or reject the particular statement. We have to make sure that we are not biased from our past experiences, from the society, but we just have to stick over the statement that has been provided. And then we will have to figure out. We don't have to, analyze the answers on the basis of our perspective. We don't have to take our perspective into consideration, but based on the regulations, based on the notions of the truth or the past experiences of the majority of the people in the society, that has to be taken into consideration, not our own biases. So be mindful of the biases in the argument. A strong argument, it is very important for you to note down this particular point as a tip for while solving questions which is related to statement and argument. That is that we have to identify the biases. There shouldn't be any biases. A strong argument. What is a strong argument, my dear students? A strong argument is one which is neutral and objective. A strong argument is one which is neutral. Neutral means it should not be biased over one particular perception. You should not be biased over the argument that is being given just because you feel that this answer might be right. The tip is that if the argument is neutral and objective, while an weak argument may be biased, leaning too heavily on a personal opinion or one side perspective. And that is why it is important that you identify biases. If you feel like that there is an argument that has been provided along with the statement, which is biased towards one particular perception, that argument has to be neglected, has to be rejected, because that argument is not neutral. And until unless the argument is not neutral, then it means that it is a weak argument, and we have to reject that argument that has to be taken into consideration. In the same manner, we have to evaluate logical consistency. Evaluate logical consistency, इसका मतलब क्या होता है? What do you understand by evaluate logical consistency? It means that the argument, ensure that the arguments flow logically and internally consistent. Internally consistent with what? With the statement that has been provided. With the statement that has been provided, the argument should logically follow from that particular statement. I'll give you an instance. Use of mobile phones is going to be harmful for the upcoming generations. Let's take this as an example. At the same point of time, the argument is mobile phones are cheaper and that's why easily available. So if you can understand, if you can summarize, there is one statement that is saying that the use of mobile phones is going to be harmful for the upcoming generation. This is the statement. And then there is an argument which says that the mobile phones are cheaper. That's why it is very much more accessible. Maybe it can be an argument, but this argument is actually not logically following the statement that has been provided. If this argument would have been that the use of mobile phone causes eye irritation and mental disorders, so this type of argument is actually resonating and logically following from the statement that has been provided. But if you take that argument into nature, where the argument says that the mobile phones are easily accessible because they are cheaper in nature, this is not an exact replica or the answer or the argument which is following the statement that has been provided. And that is why it will be considered as a weak argument. And that is why it has to be neglected. In the same point of time, if the argument is logically following the statement that has been provided, that argument will be considered as a logically consistent argument for the statement. Strong argument will not contradict themselves or the statement. Strong arguments are not going to contradict the statement that has been provided. Very important point to be noted here. That the strong argument will obviously be complementing the statement that has been provided. And it means that it will clearly showcases that the statement that has been provided, that statement and the argument are logically connected. Means they are connected in some manner. And in the same way, while weak ones may show inconsistently or faulty logic. The example right now that I have given is a perfect example that you can understand as a weak one, where there was a statement which provided about the use of mobile phone and its impact on the students. On the argument side, we are saying that the students are able to access the mobile phones because it is cheaper in nature, which is not actually correlating with the statement. That is why it becomes very important to understand that what is the logic saying and what is the statement, as well as whether the argument is following that statement or not. In the third one, when we talk about consider the sources of the argument, So we have to consider the sources also. In real world scenarios, consider who might be making the argument. Arguments from credible, knowledgeable sources are typically stronger, while those from untrustworthy or uninformed sources tend to be weaker. This is a clear fact, and you people might have been applying this logic almost everywhere whenever you are trying to figuring out that what can be the correct reason for the same. If the sources are credible sources, for example, if there is a statement that Earth is round, How can you come to this particular argument that yes, the earth is round? Because we have credible sources. You have seen the images of the earth. You have seen that on different areas where earth has been mentioned as spherical, circle. So these are the credible sources. The credible sources has to be relied upon, and untrustworthy and uninformed sources has to be rejected. So if there is any statement which cannot be trusted, which is not from credible sources, and how you're going to figure out whether this argument is from credible sources or not from credible sources, that will depend upon the argument that will be in front of you. कोई argument अगर credible sources से होगा, you will be able to figure out yes, this is a credible source. But अगर कोई argument लिखा गया है जो कि हम लोगों को जितने भी रीडर्स हैं, जब आप उस क्वेश्चन को पढ़ेंगे, you will be able to figure out that this cannot be a credible source. That particular argument has to be rejected. Watch for emotional appeals. If there is an emotional connect in the argument, then that has to be rejected. Strong arguments are grounded in logic and evidence rather than emotional appeals. If argument plays solely on emotion without facts to be back it up, it is likely weak. So any emotional appeals that has been made in any of the argument, where which you see that the reader is able to figure out that this is based on an emotional connect with the statement, that argument cannot be considered to be a strong argument. It has to be rejected. Quantify if possible. What does that mean? Argument that use specific data, numbers or facts track to be stronger. If there is a specific data that has been mentioned, then that argument can be can be taken into consideration as a strong argument. And vague arguments without quantifiable evidence are often less convincing and considered to be weaker. Therefore, all the arguments, if they have a number specifically mentioned, that 70% of the readers are using mobile phones, 45% of the readers of the students are using mobile phones, and that is why that particular argument can be considered to be a valid argument. Why? Because that argument has quantifiable data, which is showcasing that yes, this is the percentage of amount of people who are actually using mobile phones. So that is why we can consider that the teenagers whomsoever are using mobile phones tend to get health issues if they are going to use it for a longer period of time. So all those arguments where the data is specifically mentioned has to be taken as a stronger argument rather than considering any other argument which is without quantifiable evidence. So ये सारी चीजें, it's very important for all the aspirants who are going to solve statement and arguments questions in their competitive examinations, that these tricks has to be kept in mind. First is identify biases. आपको biases remove करना है. So first is biases. Evaluate logical consistencies. So if there is logical consistency, if there is no strong contradicting argument over the statement, so that has to be taken into consideration. So it should be logically consistent. Then you have sources of the argument. The argument sources also has to be considered. What exactly is the source? Then you have to watch for emotional appeals. You have to see for emotional appeals that there should be no emotional appeals. And then you have to quantify, meaning which that there should be a quantified data. So if you can remember BLS EQ, so you will be able to remember their tricks. These tricks are going to be very much assistant whenever you are going to solve questions which is related to statements and arguments. Moving forward, let's try to discuss some more tips that one student or one competitive examination aspirants should take into their mind whenever they are solving these questions. So look for precedent or historical evidence. If there is a historical evidence or precedent that has been provided, strong argument often reference past experiences or examples to prove their point. The first is if the argument is backed by a history of success or failure, it is considered to be more reliable. Check for the short-term versus long-term impact. Strong arguments will consider both the short-term and long-term effect of a decision. Arguments that focus solely on immediate outcomes without regard to future consequences are often weak. So, strong arguments किसको follow करेंगे? Will consider both the short term as well as the long term effect of a decision. Okay, this is the strong argument, which is not only considering the short term but as well as the long term effect of a decision. Argument that focus solely on immediate outcome, meaning which the short term without regard to the future consequences are often weak. So the impact of the argument over the statement has to be taken into consideration. Evaluate simplicity versus complexity. Sometimes overlying simplistic arguments are weak because they fail to consider the complexity of the issue. A strong argument will address the nuances of the situation rather than reducing into a very simple, overly simple term. So अगर बिल्कुल सिंपल आपको आर्ग्यूमेंट दिया हुआ है तो there are chances that that can be considered as a weak argument. So all these policies has to be kept in mind whenever you are solving statements and arguments, my dear students. And statement and argument questions are on such a manner that the more questions you will solve, the more practice you will do of these questions, statements and argument, more you are going to be getting the benefit out of the practice that you're going to do, and more favorable will be the outcome in your competitive examination whenever you're talking about logical reasoning, specifically statement and argument. I can assure you that after completion of this lecture series, and if you are being consistent with us, you will be able to solve every question which is related to statements and arguments. You will be able to figure out that which is the weak argument that has to be neglected, which is the strong argument that has to be complied with. And this is how you will be getting mastery over the topic of statements and arguments. And you can ensure that the answers that are going to be coming of the questions that is being provided will be a perfectly correct answer, and you don't have to cross verify and you don't have to worry that ये जो मेरा आंसर है ये सही है या नहीं है. So moving forward, these are the things that you have to also keep in mind. Apart from the previous things that we have already talked about, we have talked about the biases, we have talked about the logical consistency, we have talked about considered the sources of argument, we have talked about the emotional appeals, we have talked about the quantify the data if possible. So BLSEQ is the tips that you should be keeping in mind whenever you're going to solve questions which is related to what? Which is related to statement and argument. In the same manner, look for precedent or historical evidence. Look for short-term and versus long-term impact. Then evaluate simplicity versus complexity. Then test counter-arguments. Mentally test if opposite of an argument can be supported as easily. If an argument can be easily refuted or turned on its head, it is a weak. So counter arguments, if there is an argument that has been given, you have to figure out whether that argument can be easily rebutted. If their contradiction can only be provided in a very easy manner, that argument is considered to be a weak argument. And in the same manner, analyze the scope of the argument. आपको argument के scope को भी analyze करना, it's very important. You have to figure out that arguments that are too broad or try to address multiple unrelated points can be considered to be weak. Strong arguments stay focused and directly address the key issues presented in the statement. So, जो argument जो बहुत सारे चीजों को कवर करने की कोशिश कर रहा है, it is pointing over one other perspective of the statement and it is providing another viewpoint that has to be neglected, because a strong argument only be focusing over the statement that has been provided. So that is how we are going to use these tips. These tips are going to be very much beneficial for all the students who are going to solve the questions which is related to statements and arguments. I hope you have noted down the important tips that are going to be applied in our questions which is related to statements and arguments. And we will ensure that these tips are on continuous basis being applied in the practice questions that we are going to solve in this lecture series. Not only that, in the upcoming video, you will find some questions which are formed as an exercise where the solution has been provided to all the viewers so that they can also understand. We will discuss about the solution, that why exactly this solution has been provided, why this counterpart cannot be taken into consideration. And that is how we are going to analyze the statements and arguments. So my dear students, I will request you all to keep all these 10 tips in mind whenever we are going to solve the statements and argument questions in our upcoming videos. And at the same point of time, I would request all of you to make a note of all the things that we are studying, so that once the whole lecture series gets over, you have your own notes and you can revise it before going for a competitive examinations. And please make sure that you are being consistent with the approach and you are solving these type of questions which is related to statements and arguments on daily basis, because these logical reasoning questions requires immense amount of practice, so that one is very much conversant with the type of question that will be asked in the competitive examinations. So with this, I would like to end today's video session, which we have discussed about the important tips that will be kept handy whenever we are going to solve questions which is related to statements and arguments, my dear students. And in our upcoming video, we will be discussing about the different type of questions that has been asked in our previous competitive examinations. And based on that, we will try to analyze the solutions that has been provided so that we can understand that how the answer has to be whenever we are solving the questions which is related to statements and arguments, my dear students. With this, I would like to thank you all for being present in this video session. And I hope that you have gained knowledgeable insights in regards to statements and arguments. Let's meet in the another video which we are going to discuss and analyze the questions which is related to statements and arguments, my dear students. Till then, bye bye and take care.